So, hi everybody. I'm Durgadas. My
Why
name
did I
is
lose
Regis.
sound again?
Oh, I don't know. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I've gotcha.
I don't hear Penguin. Penguin, I see your mic, but I
Yeah,
don't
I
hear.
can hear you okay.
Okay, great.
Oh, okay, I hear Penguin now.
There we go.
Okay, so this is a thing that I've created recently based on some connections that I made between my former work with athletes, and I realized pretty soon in dealing with the token engineering commons that a lot of the people that I was dealing with were basically in this 24/7 kind of work mode. Sort of, a lot of them, had sort of gigs going on, and they had sort of side gigs for their side gigs, and everybody's working all the time, including myself. And so I was getting a little tired of that myself. I have a regular job, and then I'm a consultant, and I also work the Token Engineering Commons, and so all of this was kind of getting me down. And then I was asked to run a cryptocurrency company once upon a time, and I popped myself into the crypto space to see if I had something to contribute. And next thing you know, I actually was able to do that. So, um, I basically, based on my previous work with, let's see if I can get the slide to go. There we go. So, so I started participating. Mostly in the graviton and philosophy spaces with Sebnem. Some of you might know her if you're familiar with Token Engineering Commons and other places, the .art group. Um, I'm basically kind of a behind the scenes helper for Juan K, who's in there uh, being the real graviton steward, and I'm just kind of like helping behind him. Um, So yeah, I lived in a Hindu monastery for a number of years, and so as a former athlete, a former coach of elite athletes, I kind of combined with athletes my approach from my spiritual formal training and my spiritual experiences into this kind of combination of things. And then when I left the ashram, I started getting into nonviolent communication and spiral dynamics and integral theory, and so uh, now with the deliberately developmental organization stuff that I'm doing, which is on the most recent metagame podcast. And I'm also, because my wife is an Olympic medalist, she's also the first woman of East Indian descent to win an Olympic medal. So there's a lot of decolonization work that I do as well, having had to gone through that process, working for a native band. So yeah, there's a lot of. I'm also on the autism spectrum, so teaching a master's course on autism and how to overcome overwhelm and othering into um, this. And what I'm going to present to you guys now is actually the sort of the cornerstone of the 4-step process that we use in that course, but it's applicable both to athletes, people in the autism spectrum who need more predictable ways to place their effort. And so yeah, I'm going to present to you guys that stuff today. So welcome, and there'll be a decent amount of time for questions because I don't have too many slides, but I just want to give you the overview to start with. So basically, the foundation of this was basically how is it that I can take my intentionality, connect it with a goal, and then schedule that out so that I can do all these things together without sort of losing myself. So um, I'm also noticing a lot of people tend to exclude themselves from their own lives in pursuit of their goals. Um, and they also forget about themselves in the sense where they're so in pursuit of their goals, they end up kind of neglecting their own sort of sharpening their own saw, so to speak, and learning and even treating themselves with compassion and regarding themselves with, complexity and um, and even where people are doing these things, that will often do things like take psychotropic substances and other stuff, but the bridge for that is a little bit too far. So what I'm trying to do is give some kind of context to some of these efforts that I've made myself and work with other people to kind of accomplish. And the whole idea behind this is that there should be some way in which you can contextualize your efforts so that you can optimize the inherent adaptability of the body, and the body actually has time scales associated with it, which we're going to talk about at length today. There's time scales on a daily basis. There's time scales on a there's two actually adaptive time scales within the week. The week itself has an adaptive time scale, and then 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 3 years, 7 years, 12 years, 21 years. So, so that's a pretty large time scale. And what if we could understand how all those things worked and structure our lives in such a way that we get all the rest that we need, we don't burn out, we can have serious intentionality, we can have serious space behind all these things. So the foundation that I'm kind of giving to you now comes both from a neuroscience perspective and from my my work with athletes and people on the autism spectrum. So as the beginning of this, basically there are essentially two ways to think. You have a bicameral brain. If you watch the Jill Bolte-Taylor Stroke of Insight video, which I have listed in here, and the divided brain and the making of the Western world, it's a very sort of a beautiful explanation about how this kind of thing works. I go into this in depth in my decolonization presentation about the social implications of all of this, but suffice it to say that we basically have a serial processor on the left side of our brain, and we have a parallel processor on the right side of our brain, and it's the combination of these two things together that actually creates the way that we think, right? And so if you watch the video, you'll see in a very inspirational way Jill Bolte-Taylor's Stroke of Insight, and it's also true that because we're often dealing with in the crypto world, or people who are like myself, I'm a professional geek. If you're looking at a lot of code, there's a lot of language, there's a lot of details, there's a lot of differentiation. So your brain is naturally going to go into this sort of divided mentality. And of course, if that's not bad enough, you have an entire culture that's very interested in making you think about things according to this sort of divided story of the world. So I just wanted you to see that this stuff is all oriented toward these two different ways to think, and this has many implications for the way that we sort of deal with our lives. But it's important to understand that this is the ground substance for how we as human beings having human problems in a timeless, infinite, unchanging reality. There's my spiritual thing. Are actually tasked with handling this, and what it's my proposition that we've gotten too far on the divided side of the picture, which you can see in the next slide, which basically here's the basic problem. The basic problem is that we are entirely too left brain oriented. We're entirely too task oriented. And we typically have schedules and priorities which are extrinsic to ourselves, and they're mandated by the task itself or our boss or some other larger entity or authority, or and in many ways the DAO space is intended to kind of address the problem with the imbalance of the sort of task oriented stuff. But even so, we take that training with us when we come into the DAO space, and tend to even in our pursuit of our human oriented side, where we could have things in order and schedule, we do actually tend to move ourselves toward that sort of divided way of thinking again. On the other hand, the human oriented side of the picture is where you understand internally what you need to align your own cycles and your own intentions and your own intrinsic motivation, that's focused less on the outcome than it is on the effort itself, and just to enjoy the process of training, understand how all of this works. Now, of course, it's not as simple as this in the sense that we sometimes need to put our human selves beside to sort of get things done. And the problem is if you live your entire life like that, then it can be very much a burnout kind of situation. You can be not treating yourself even like a human being. And oftentimes we even talk to each other in that way. So that's kind of a bad way to live. In my opinion. So what I'm trying to do is create a virtuous cycle whereby we have a balance between these two things, and the task-oriented stuff is done sort of reluctantly, or only when it's absolutely needed, or um, only when you have enough agency and kind of autonomy to make conscious decisions about when to sort of sacrifice the human side of yourself to accomplish given tasks, right? So um, yeah, and there are many roles that make us kind of do that as parents or leaders, or sometimes we have to do that, but you kind of need both sides of the picture. So what my argument here is that we need to have both, and we need to have the task oriented stuff, which is highly imbalanced in our culture overall and how we treat ourselves, um, is to be sort of subservient to the human oriented side of this picture. And it's also sort of my general assertion that we in the crypto space, a lot of the things that we're attempting to do with crypto is make more human oriented this sort of world of money, but we won't be able to do that if we don't internally change ourselves. We don't marry the technology and the psychology and our own internal and then the organizations that we participate in, especially in DAOs, because you can have more of a say in what goes on in those. If unless you marry the psychology with the technology, then we're just going to be creating these divided ways of thinking that will end up, being extractive and exploitative anyway, right? So, um, so if you guys don't take anything else from this thing, the knowledge I have about this is extremely deep, and I've worked with a lot of athletes on it for years and years and years, and subjected myself to this same sort of structural thing, and the beauty of the discovery process. If you can take one thing away from this, I'm going to suggest that you um, kind of orient yourself in these with these three daily missions, and they can be 1, 2, 3 based on the thing we're going to find out next in the week, and how to structure the week. But if all the rest of it's too confusing for you, if you just orient yourself in these three ways, where you um, the top thing is about grounding and orienting yourself and reflecting about what's going on and having some space and time to do that. Number two is the one that's really usually imbalanced, which is expressing and contributing and working. And then the third thing is the rest and digest inspiration side of the picture. So if you're talking about the the systems of the body, there's the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And in our typical way of dealing with things, as far as both in our physical bodies, both in our mentality, we tend to emphasize the middle one here, this number two, which is express, contribute, and work. That is the sympathetic nervous system, right? Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system is often forgot about. So this ground, orient, reflect, and rest, digest, inspire, or inspiration is often forgotten. And so what we end up doing is if we're so heavily emphasizing the express, contribute, work thing, then you kind of end up burning out. So the metaphor that I always talk about is you can only exhale for so long, before you have to actually inhale at some point. And it's I figure that there is kind of a time limit on how much you can actually borrow from tomorrow, the energy that you would use tomorrow to express yourself today, right? So it's my proposition here that we actually, out of the three missions that we have, we should be emphasizing the ground, orient, reflect, and the rest, digest, and inspire parts of our lives to support anything that we have to express or contribute or to work on. Um, so in order to do that, I basically have this proposition here. Now, one of the things you might notice from this slide is that there are actually some time periods in which these things can be expressed. So, for example, in Indian time scales, when you're talking about the day, and if you're going to get up and meditate, there's this thing called the Brahma Muhurta, which is between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. So typically that's the time when at the ashram we would get up and meditate, and then 10 a.m. is the first time where the temperature of the body is high and you're ripe for digesting. So typically eating at 10 a.m. is better than eating at noon. This also tends to avoid just by adjusting your schedule forward a couple of hours. It'll also tend to avoid that after work or that after lunch coma that comes about 2:30, and that's going to interrupt your second daily mission, which is to work and express and contribute. And then at 6 p.m., then we have another period where especially for men, less so for women, 6 p.m. is like the peak of the temperature in the body between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. That's also the 6 p.m. If you're working out 4 to 6 p.m. and then you eat 6 to 6:30, that's the most ideal place. So at the ashram, we would always eat at 10:30, and then 6 to 6:30 we'd eat dinner, and that was it. And then you would have like a constant energy through the entire day. And then the rest digest get inspired thing is after 6 p.m. Then we're talking about treating ourselves to that so we can recover from the day, and we can also do things that kind of inspire us or are sort of creative or things like that. So um, it's also important to understand that each day, depending on what you're doing during the week, we'll see in the next slide, the different kinds of missions that you have are going to change based on the week. And then the structure of the week will then change based on where you are in a 6-week block. And then the emphasis of those 6-week blocks will change based on where you are toward your yearly or bi-yearly goals. So any questions at this point? Since I'm about a third of the way through.
I don't have any questions, but I really appreciate what you're saying about the ideal times of day for doing different things. It does make a difference how you shift your day around.
It's true, yeah. And the whole idea here is that every single part of this, from the daily schedule to the weekly schedule to the 6-week schedule and everything, is all aligned with the adaptive and neuroadaptive ways that that human beings just work, right? So so we'll see a little bit more of that in the next slide, which is a little bit more complicated. Okay, so this has keys and everything to it, but and you can see to some degree that this was written with the idea of an athlete who has like a weekend race kind of setup. But you can use this to periodize your efforts too, and I'll actually show you a practical example of how one of my students from the autism course that I'm teaching, she basically took those things and put it into her own sticky note version of this. So she has like a rolling month even for this. But the whole idea here is that the idea of Monday is this deep rest thing. Tuesday is the where you're breaking limitations and trying new things and doing things kind of intensely. And so if that's doing things you don't like, like Tuesday is my paperwork day because I hate paperwork. It's so much. So when I'm going to challenge myself with something new or learn a new technology or programming language or do anything like that, I'm trying to do that on Tuesdays, so that I don't feel like I have to do that like every day, right? The same thing as Wednesday there's kind of an extending yourself thing. Um, you're befriending your own stress where you're like, okay, I've got a lot to do, and you shouldn't be learning new things here. This should be a way of expressing your growth edge, on the Wednesdays, and then Thursday is kind of like, don't do new things, but just do them all day, right? All stake, go all day, no stakes, and no breaks. So Monday, Thursday, and Friday have the same kind of basic attitude to them, which is why they're all blue. And then the warmer colors on Tuesdays and Wednesdays are intended to represent the basic intensity of it. It's also true that Friday needs to be active rest, not like Monday. If you're going to take a day off, it would be the Monday. And then you need to do more like an active rest thing. So, you know, yeah, hydration, loading, visualizing outcomes for the weekend. And it's also important to note that the structural difference between the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and the Saturday and Sunday is the difference between the structured and the unstructured. So the point of doing the structured stuff is to then combine those efforts together into an unstructured way where you learn how to be both rigid and structured in a certain sense, and then how to sort of break that structure and use the things that you figured out during the week to kind of express that in a new and novel way on the weekend. So typically the way the structure of this is set up is that Sunday would be the big goal, but the point really is you can also modify your Wednesdays and Thursdays where you swap them around so that if you have a Saturday goal, you can swap those colors around. So part of the there's so much in this that's important to sort of explain, but the part of the thing is not just the difference between the structured and unstructured, but it's also that there are a lot of period of time where you're doing this sort of train through mentality. The idea being that that you're essentially removing the stakes from things, right? So a lot of times when we have difficulty with achieving goals and things, it's because we often get really caught up in how much stakes there are, how much is at stake, and so on. So the point of this is then to make it so that you actually practice every week, not only the shifting between the structured and the unstructured, but also to make it so that when you're doing your Saturday, for example, you should do like a dry run of whatever it is that you're going to do, right? So you do the same thing that you would do on the Sunday, on Saturday, to with the same intensity, but with no stakes at all. So you're almost like doing a prep run in your mind, so that then it's easier to remove the feeling that stakes exist on Sunday if you'd practiced it the day before, because and this is a thing that, like, if you ever seen the Build a Tower, Build a Team TED Talk, he actually talks about how they have this thing called the marshmallow test. The marshmallow test is where they basically give people a box of spaghetti and a marshmallow and ask them to build a structure that holds the marshmallow on top. And one of the things that they discovered, among many things, it's a really beautiful TED Talk I'd highly recommend that you watch, was that if you just suddenly show up before the thing and say, I'm going to give you $10,000 to whoever builds the tallest structure, the very first time they ever did that, after many times of doing it with many teams, they had no standing structures because people just completely collapsed under the pressure of having to suddenly have there be stakes. So a huge amount of sort of creating virtuosity in your cycles is about mastering the mental game of how to subvert that problem, right? So what's really cool is then you have your structure, that you have your practice of breaking the structure, but you're also practicing breaking the cycle of being kind of a slave to the fact that stakes exist. And so there are multiple psychological layers and levels to this, which I can't get into in an hour. I think it'd probably take a 3-hour presentation to get to everything. But at some point, what we might want to do is, I could, do a consulting with some of you who are interested in designing a structure for yourselves, and we can go forward with that. I've done this a whole bunch, so let's move from now the weekly structure and see how the echoes of this structure exist also in the the 6 week block. So just to give you a clear sense of things, the way the daily thing works is great to know those hours, but within this week you also have two 3.5 day cycles. So basically, one of the things you'll notice about how I leave off the intensity on a Wednesday, the very next time that you have to have super high intensity is going to be on Sunday. That's basically a 4 day cycle. So that gives you like a half extra day there. Then so if you actually take a look at how, if I'm repeating week after week, you'll start to see how this 3.5 to 4 day cycle thing or repeats over and over and over again as it stacks up into the 6 week block. And what's great about following this really strongly is then you can start to compare one Tuesday to the next Tuesday, excuse me. And you can actually see how the progress works. And we'll get into what the minimums are on noticing progress kind of at the end. But in any case, the 6 week block basically works like this, where the colors are also analogous to the colors from before, whereas week 1 is always a rest week. And this actually is the thing that actually sets your the cycle. So the rest week is the thing that's the most important part of this. So week 6 is important because you're doing all your biggest stuff there, and that's the absolute pinnacle of your effort level. But the other thing that you get actually from doing it like this, where you have the week 6 is you can give all of yourself, because you know that the following week you have a rest week, that you're literally taking all of the intensity and all of the volume that you might have been practicing at completely out, so that you basically have an entire week of Mondays. So that's what this is kind of for. And then week 2 is getting back on the horse, adding some intensity back into your thing. And it's always going to feel like a shock to the system after week 1. Week 3 is about putting yourself into stress. So the intensity is one thing, but to specifically stress yourself in preparation for week 4, where you're going to take that same intensity. So this is week 2 is always going to be the highest and most intense thing, because it's most like Tuesdays, which is also the highest and most intense thing. You're going to have slightly less intensity, but you're going to do it for longer. And then week 4 is basically about lengthening your capacity in terms of creating stress within yourself intentionally. And I put in here, it's stress in context, right? So you're and then week 5 is extending that even further, but not in the most ultimate way, because you have week 6, which is the sort of pinnacle of everything. You should be operating at your highest, most peak situation for this. And you'll also notice that there is a kind of a hash mark that cuts down through the middle of these things. And the reason why I put that there was because it's important to understand how you can adapt to interruptions. So the great thing about following this set of things is that you'll learn how you adapt. You learn the timeframes of adaptability with respect to the human condition. And then you know that when something does happen, you can interrupt it, and then you can build back using the same principles. So let's say something happens and you have to chop your week in half, or you suddenly have to move, or whatever. You have a life thing that's occurring. Generally speaking, that's going to take 3 to 4 weeks to resolve and feel comfortable and get things together. And then you'll be able to get back on it. Then you'll be able to readjust the 6 week blocks that continue toward your sort of yearly and bi-yearly goals, which we're going to talk about next. But it's important to understand that this 3 and 6 week block thing is is very beautiful, because if you follow through with the 1 6-week block after another for an entire year, by the time you get to that end of that year, then you're like, I understand the internal structure of my 3 and 6 week thing. You've had situations in which you've had your designated training plan and everything interrupted to some degree. You've understood then how this 3 and 6 week cycle things, you can readapt to those kinds of interruptions, and then it gives you a lot more confidence kind of going into that second year, where you're like, okay, now I understand how all this works, and it gives you kind of a rootedness, a kind of groundedness in your own ability to take your intentionality and marry it with the schedule and all the stuff that we talked about at the beginning. So as a person who lived by this for years, I can tell you that it's a little bit like catching a wave, in the sense where you're always sort of just on the front of your own adaptability, and it just starts to feel like, and psychologically, the impact of this is something that I simply can't put in words. Honestly, it is one of the greatest things I've ever experienced in my life, is to gain real mastery at this kind of thing, even in the face of difficulties, interruptions, injuries, and other life things. So this is there are two approaches basically of planning the year. One is the top one, where you actually, if you see the pyramids have two different colors there. One, you'd basically have like a 6-month grouping of 4 6-week blocks that would basically put you to goal 1. And then you would have a kind of a transition plan into your next goal. It could be in a completely different way. So let's say you have like a physical goal in the first part of the year, and then you have like a mental goal, or you have a maybe you've got school that starts at the end of the year. Then you could kind of do whatever your goals are at the beginning of the year, and then start like this next thing. The thing that I talked to you about the 3 and 6 week adaptation between goals actually helps you to understand how that 3 and 6 week thing works. I won't go into it too much. Those of you who want to do kind of a private consulting thing with me about this, this will be fundamental to that discussion, because we basically start with the year and work our way backward, and we don't really even talk about the next slide until we're like into the second year. But to be honest, it's probably the most important aspect of all of it. But anyway, then the second part of the approach that you could take is, let's say, like back when I was an athlete, I'd have like a qualifying situation where I had to be able to do well at my regional thing, and without doing well at my regional thing, I wouldn't be able to go and do the national thing, right? So it's basically the same set of goals, the same. I'm not like doing two totally different things, one physical and one mental. I'm really just doing sort of one contiguous kind of thing that has 2 periods in it. Then you can use this second approach to that. So I'm going to create another graphic, by the way, later on. I just didn't have time to do it today. That will kind of show all of the day, the week, the 6-week, and the yearly scheduling in one graphic at the same time. And then now we get into the kind of the meta part of this. So we spent a lot of time talking about how the periodization stuff works, but the point of all of this is to think developmentally, and to put like an intentionality and the things that you kind of discover along the way, so one of the key terms in this is mindfulness, right? So this takes an incredible amount of mindfulness, an incredible amount of intentionality, but then after that first year, then you're like, I've got this, and you practice it, and you know how it works. And then every year subsequent to that, and I always use this with my athletes too, you have to really commit to the process for a year, like hardcore, and work on yourself. And it's adapting yourself to that way of thinking first, and then second, then once you set up the cycles and you start following them, you're like, oh my God, this stuff is real. Like, oh my God, the body really does want to get up at 4 to 6 a.m. The body really does want to digest at this time. And so as you sort of move this forward, then it sort of you have to kind of commit to it at first because it's an unknown, but then as time goes on, then your own experience validates these things. And then what you can do is get into the meta stuff about this. Like, what is your real intentionality behind this? What lessons are you learning? You're going to discover things about yourself during this process too. And so the way that I've kind of set this up is that there's a 4 part thing, and then there's kind of some stuff that happens in the background as far as the larger and longer cycles that, if you work with me sort of in a consultative way over a long period of time, we can get much more into. But I just like to that background stuff to exist there so people know that there is a really a longer game that you can play with all of that that we don't typically talk about right at the start. But in any case, the top of this graph is basically the minimum mission increment. In other words, if you have the mission itself is to actually start treating yourself in a balanced way that like we talked about, a balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic, a balance between the divided and unified ways of thinking, a balance between constantly working on task oriented things and instead substituting in some of your human structure that you need to support yourself. So then the next thing is the mini cycle, which is this the minimum visible progress that you're going to see, like I mentioned before, about noticing the progress between one Tuesday and another, one Wednesday and another, one Thursday and another, and so on. Even your competence at taking rest on Mondays and Fridays will improve over time, right? Your ability to adapt between the structured and the unstructured, and then go back to structured again. All of these competencies are start to be noticed, and then those roll up, with so between the microcycle, the daily missions, and the mini cycle, it takes a little bit of faith to really put this all together. And I'll show you a really good example of my student who really applied herself to this. But then once you start to recognize all of these things, like I was saying, the way the improvement between Tuesdays and Wednesdays and the weekends and so on, you can kind of make the discoveries, oh, that's a real thing. And then what it does, it increases your motivation to, continue contextualizing the work that you're doing in terms of the 6-week macro blocks, which are then 4 of these build up into sort of the half of a year. And then the yearly cycle, then generally a yearly cycle is like 8.6666 week cycles. So so you can do 2 major builds within that. But the thing is like I said before, between the way the 6-week block works and the yearly cycle works, what ends up happening is you start to begin to trust the process, and you trust yourself inside of the progress. So what's neat about this then is you can start to notice when you come out of like into week 2 of your second 6-week block, you'll be like, oh, I noticed the difference between this week 2 and last week 2, you see? And this is the minimum build goal progress. And then the minimum context switch from the yearly cycle is basically where you're where you've gone from being somebody who seems to be at the effect of all of these things to having some autonomy and agency over your time, over combining. It's a really beautiful, autonomous, and agency filled and confidence building thing to have the kind of ability to just execute upon your own intentions, the things that you want, the things that you value. And I think it's really excellent for the crypto space, because in many ways that's exactly what we're attempting to do. We're just attempting to do it with money. So being that it's my interest and my specific sort of life goal now is to work with people to improve that, I wanted to give them a really concrete thing. A lot of times when we talk about spiral dynamics and integral theory, it's all big, spirals and colors and all these different things, and it can be a little bit and a little bit lacking in practical applicability. This stuff, if you can learn it, is one of the best things you can do with respect to making your own intentionality and the high thinking and lessons and discoveries and mindfulness actually hit the ground and do something and execute in some way. And the secondary aspect of that is that you'll learn a lot and you'll discover a lot of things. So this is the this is I just want you to read some of the highlights I put in here, because in the top she was basically summarizing for herself the stuff that we had talked about, right? And then she's built from the bottom up. Actually, her calendar goes backwards because she wanted to feel like she was building towards something. But the intentionality behind all of this is captured in this top thing, and they're not very easy to read even when I zoomed in on them. So I just put some highlights down in the side. So so Monday is she put in Minecraft. Tuesday is punch through and do the shittiest shit. I still crack up about that. Wednesday is crush it and get shit done. The word shit features prominently in all of these. Do cool, smart shit on Thursday. Do fun shit on Friday. No fear and no fucks for game day. And then Adventures, Connection, and tie loose ends for her Sunday. So I just thought that was just beautiful. And I loved how she took all these sort of fancy graphics that I made and just set it up to get some shit done. So anyway, that's basically it. So I'm now at the point where I just want to tell you that if you want to look for some answers on spiritual topics on Quora and Kundalini and a lot of other things, I've got a bunch of answers on Quora, and then that's my contact information there, and I'm ready for questions.
One of the things I noticed with the daily 6-day slide, there was something about FF, and I was at the flex flow. So before this is when it's like laying out the temperatures of the days.
Yeah, flex flow. That's this idea of this is kind of an integral idea, right? So creating flow states and things are uh, it's my proposition that you can learn to set up flow states, and it's actually, this is the sort of external structure that supports the creation of flow states from my perspective. So yeah, flex flow is kind of the integral term. The word flow state means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, depending on the context. So I've got probably 6 different definitions of it for myself. All of what I'm talking about now supports that flex flow. And flex flow is a place in which you'll notice that I've got this emergence thing here talking about that. It is from that flex flow thing where this stuff kind of emerges from, right? So does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes more sense. So it's like flex flow is kind of like the state where you're optimating, you're operating at like the optimum kind of capacity, and you're resting well, and
yeah, right. And it's also a mindfulness edge, right? To be in flex flow, there has to be kind of a mindfulness of the field. There's actually, in athletics, there's this way to focus, but then there's also this way to kind of focus in a way that incorporates the entire field of play. So if you can see guys playing basketball that like do no-handed things, it's because they have that field, of view. And that's from an athletic standpoint, that's the flow sort of state. A lot of times if you're coding, you can get into a similar thing where you like there's this matrix thing that goes on, and so anyway, so that's kind of that's all of this is in support of creating that on the multiple levels that I haven't really gone into, but I'm aware of.
great,
Next
thank
question.
you.
Thanks so much for this. Thanks
What
so
did you
much
guys
for
think?
this. Yeah, I thought it was great. Thanks so much for this awesome talk and mapping it out.
Mm-hmm.
Question to you would be, okay, if there's ideal eating times, have you ever come across any ideal exercise, sleeping, meditation times?
Yeah, all of that.
Or
That's
even
exactly.
optimal focus?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
about during the day? Take one day, is there a time that's optimal to meditate, time that's optimal to
Yep.
exercise?
4 a.m. to 6 a.m. and then again from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m.
Mhm.
But the reason why the 6 p.m. thing is there is because if you think about it, six basically it's a 3-hour block. So you're setting your sleep time usually at the time when you eat, right? So
Mhm.
so that's what you figure out is you might have half an hour less or more. You have to figure that out about yourself. But the yeah, for me, and in my work with athletes, you're setting your sleep time by when you're eating. So if you're eating between 6 p.m. and then it's 9 to 9:30, and at the ashram it was lights out at 10. So um, yeah, we did all that to sort of create that, and then we're up again at very early in the morning, and so yeah, the 10 a.m. thing, eating. What we would do is we would get up, do our satsang and everything, and then from 8 to 10 it was yoga time, and then you eat after yoga. You never eat before it. So yeah, so that all kind of works out too. It does typically conflict with the way the modern sort of schedule is set up, but I think once you actually commit to it for a while, you'll start to see the benefits pretty quickly. And next question.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. So Durgadas, what normally I sleep in the like probably like 7 to 10, somewhere in there, sleep a couple
Yep.
hours, and then I
Yep.
get up and I work again,
Okay.
and that works really well for me.
Sure.
However, my martial arts, which is inflexible time, is at
Right.
exactly the time that I need to sleep, and I find that
Right.
that kind of just sort of drags stuff a lot.
Yeah, I bet it would. Yeah, so that's what I'm suggesting to you is that if you align with your own sort of cycles, then that can work. And I used to commute on my bicycle back and forth to work for 6 years. I didn't own a car, so I would often be riding home at 11:30 at night, and then it would be like all I could do to calm myself down. So I would get home at 12:30 sometimes, and I'd be sitting there for an hour trying to go back to sleep. Thankfully I could sleep in, but it just never really worked with me, and I didn't understand why until I lived at the ashram and started to work with athletes around their ideal times. It's also true that a lot of times what people will do is because they're busy during the day, they'll skip dinner or they'll skip all their other meals and then only eat dinner, which basically also blows up your schedule, robs you of a number of crucial nutrients and other things. And I've seen even elite athletes who don't eat that much just by eating only at night will gain weight and have all kinds of problems because their ability to digest severely drops off after 6:30 or 7.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Your enzymes have a regular cycle too.
exactly. So yeah. So that's why I kind of set it up like that. So my basic ask here is that um, uh, I like people to be informed in the same way that we want to be informed about the broken monetary system. We
Right?
also are just not taught any of this stuff by anybody.
No, not at all.
You know what I'm saying? So this is kind of the whole reason why I talk about decolonization and stuff. A lot of decolonization is just treating yourself more like a human being, validating your humanness and being willing to sort of withdraw your consent from the continued. So everything is centralized. It's not just money. It's all our thinking, all our knowledge of ourselves. All of this stuff has all been centralized, and we're not taught any of it. So we imagine it's not important, and we imagine we're not important. And so the same problem that happens with money happens in every other part of life. And what I'm suggesting is that by aligning yourself to this kind of cyclical thing that is just human in nature, you can support your work in crypto, you can support your work in spiritual life, you can support your work in treating yourself compassionately in all these other ways that it's not possible for me to fully explain to you how good it can actually be
Oh, no.
except through my enthusiasm and the fact that I bothered to spend all this time, weeks and weeks and weeks, to put this stuff down that I learned with 20 years of working with athletes. I realized that, you know what, maybe this is something that everybody can use. And this is the very first time I've formally presented it to a group. So I hope you guys really liked it.
Questions. I have more questions though.
Okay.
So I mean, like, I basically have belt goals and like grappling goals. So is it going to be healthier for me to go all in and do like all of the evening classes all of the time for say 2 or 3 months and then take a month off and then go back in and go all in? Or is it going to, I feel like that is going to overall be healthier than trying to space it out so I'm only screwing up my natural rhythm like a couple nights a week. Because I feel like once you mess with your rhythm, then you're like off for more than a day anyway. I definitely am. So I should probably just go all in, white knuckle through it. What would be a period you'd recommend?
I would say if that's sufficient for you, one thing that I would do is I always start with the yearly goal and work backwards. So I would go so far as to be like, okay, so my national championships is at 3 p.m. on the East Coast. Like I would go that far, and then I would be like work my way backwards so that I would do my efforts at 12 p.m. in the heat or whatever, because wherever I was doing the thing, like if it was the Nationals was in Georgia that year, I would specifically train in the heat and I would do stuff and I would set up my body's rhythm so that when I went from, the West Coast to the East Coast to do a competition, there wasn't a body cycle problem for me to be like, oh my God, I'm off or whatever, And,
so I should just stick with, because I have it's like a goal to get a blue belt and like compete in grappling. It's all going to be done by September, and then I'm going to take a few months off and do other things. So I should just go all in and reset my clock. So what do you suggest I do to reset myself? So I should be eating. I've already started eating earlier, like at 3 in the afternoon usually, because that way.
Take these numbers and just rotate them and then adjust your cycles back so if you see, like if you're needing to exercise up until 6 p.m., right?
No, I'm needing to exercise between 6 and 9 at night.
Okay, so that's fine.
Okay.
So what I would be doing is I would be adjusting your eating what is it, clockwise, I guess. So I would eat at the end of your exercising, and but just at the end I would do very little. Do you know what I mean? So I would be loading at that 10 a.m. point where you have your biggest meal, so that the digestion is done by the time you get to the mat, and then just do you're going to eat, but eat very little. And I'm just telling you, like as a cyclist, a lot of times you had to go to bed hungry just because you wanted to lose weight, and because weight had a lot of performance benefits. So I don't know how that is in what you do, but there's an awful lot that I could talk about, and it sounds now like we're getting into kind of a consulting territory, but
finished during COVID.
But we could talk about that, as a separate thing. Anybody else have any general questions about that? You're welcome. How did you like it? I'm also just open for some feedback.
Total general question from latecomer here. I apologize. I got a little hung up trying to join the meeting, but I love your slides and I would like to make them into posters and hang them all over my walls. Have you already done that?
Yeah, I've kind of got there's a lot of information on these, and that's not necessarily visible in this slide that well, but there's things like that, and that's kind of I'm getting ready to kind of make it this is the first attempt at, I'm going to have a workshop series, and I'm going to create posters, and right now I'm just kind of trying to take on individual people as consulting kinds of folks, and then at some point we can maybe talk about that a little bit offline. But yeah, I'm going to produce probably a book out of this at some point, so there will be things like that.
Okay, well, in the meantime, I have access to a very large format full color printer
Cool.
to use for
Oh,
banners.
awesome.
If
Yeah,
there's
that'd
a
be
way
great.
for me to get a hold of the slides so I can print out my own personal posters, that's
Sure.
awesome.
Yeah, I mean they're a work in progress still, but yeah,
Okay,
maybe we can talk about that offline.
please.
So, Wulia, did you want to say something? I saw you take your. And by the way, it's the top of the hour, so I want to respect people's time, but I am willing to hang around for another 30 minutes if there's questions, because I want to make sure everybody gets heard.
I'll say that I loved it. It gave me a lot of kind of insight into how I'm already kind of working. I see myself kind of following those kind of similar patterns without having like conscious thought over it. So you kind of putting words to it and colors.
Exactly.
It really kind of helped connect what I'm already doing, and
That's so good.
yeah,
I'm so glad to hear that.
and it like helps visualize my bandwidth even without like having to plan out my month or year. And it like shows me how much I'm spreading myself thin.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I kind of asked myself with this, and this is I probably know the answer to this, but would this be possible to run in parallel if you had like multiple different things you're planning for? Could you potentially kind of split focus? I know obviously context switching is what you're kind of trying to minimize, but if you're operating on different levels
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And so a lot of the people that I work with are not just purely dedicated athletes, right? There's not not even purely dedicated intellectual athletes. Like a lot of the people who are in the token engineering commons are exactly that way. Like they're superstar coders and all this stuff. The thing that you're talking about would essentially what I would do when I was working with athletes was a lot of times they'd be like, well, I've got a guy who's 40 years old, but he still needs to do a certain thing. So what we would basically do is we would take the intensity and the volume, and we'd keep the intensity the same, but we'd subtract a certain percentage of the volume that he was doing based on his existing need to have a job and a family and so on. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's a very dedicated sort of guy. He's a professional guy, run his own business, has a wife and a child, and still managed to do 75% of what a pro cyclist would do. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that was real dedication. So depending on your sort of bandwidth, we need to maybe discuss your specific things. Then you could chop it up to say like, hey, I've got so much of my percentage of my time is like existing stress. You could do that, but the thing that I'm attempting to do is not to say, let's take one of these three things and assign it to a whole other set of things. I'm actually this is not a way to make yourself more stressed and more busy and more that's not what I'm advocating for at all, but it is of course your life. You can do whatever you want. But yeah, you could sort of take away one of the daily missions of grounding and orienting and make it an actual express contribute thing if you wanted to. I'm just not recommending it because you're going to hurt yourself. But yeah, you can.
Well, thank you.
Any other? I saw a bunch of people's mics unmute and then somebody else talk. So
I've got a question.
yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
How much
Dada group.
How much can you rely on? Okay, so I'll preface this by saying I hate outside schedules imposed.
Yes.
On my time, right?
Yes. Yes.
I totally want to just follow my own
For sure.
energy.
That's right. And this is
So
a good starting place for that.
how much can you rely on just monitoring your own energy levels to see what your body needs?
I
Rather than
literally created this entire system by doing exactly what you're talking about. In fact, that's the whole reason why I'm what Penguin was saying was great, was because the whole point of this was to just make observation about the periodization of the body. And being that I'm on the autism spectrum, I just think about things super deeply all the time. It's just my default state. This is why I have all this information, is because I carried it back with me. And then I started talking to athletes, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it works like that for me too." And every person I talk to, everyone's like, "Yeah, it works like that for me too." So there's different adaptations for different people's life circumstances, and you might be like a real night owl, and this wouldn't necessarily apply to you, but you could take that same thing and
no. I'm
rotate it.
completely on the 4 a.m. thing, right?
Great.
It's that time that you naturally wake up. I do
Sure.
get that. That's fine.
Yeah.
It is just not so much the daily cycles, it's probably the weekly and longer cycles that seem to are not quite so distinct patterns.
Yeah. Well,
And maybe that's because I'm a woman and I have a 4-week cycle
maybe.
instead of 6-week
Yep.
thing. Maybe, I don't know.
That's possible. Yeah, I'm just telling you that I've worked with male and female athletes. The part of the thing is like a runner would do better on a 3 to 4 week cycle than a cyclist would do. And part of the reason why that is just because it's running is so much more punishing to the skeletal system, right? So this isn't a hard and fast rule, but there are certain adaptive things that you break up, because like in the case of a runner, I'd want a rest week, after every third week, because I need to insert almost double the amount of overall rest time just to account for the skeletal punishment that they go through, right? And the same thing kind of happens with triathletes, for example. So I would do exactly the thing I said in the 6 week area, where I would chop this in half, and then we would operate like that. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
So
and shift everything. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So now the important part of this is, and I actually resonate with what you're talking about, because in my work as a yoga teacher, a lot of times people will come to me about, Patanjali's Ashtanga yoga system and think that it is a proscription for something, when in fact it is just an observation of the natural development of people as they progress along a spiritual thing. That's all that this is. This is not an imposition, and it's a distinctly divided mindset, cultural thing that we do, where we think everything is some kind of a thing which is externally imposed. The whole purpose of my giving you guys this is to speak to the fact that this is a human-oriented system that can allow for an interruption or a change based on a task-oriented kind of a setup, right? So if that's the intended purpose of this, is to so that you can have both things, and you can contextualize and have a flexible tool in which you can summarize and periodize your efforts.
And get shit done like your student.
Exactly. Yeah. Get the shittiest shit done. I just love that. So yeah, I mean, that's what I mean is if you take it as an imposition, upon yourself, then that's how you're going to experience it, right? But if you take it as a thing where, you're like, oh, this is just an observation of my own natural cycles, and you can just use it as a starting point and make adjustments. Do you know what I'm saying? So,
Right. Yeah.
that's all. Any other questions, Pioneer? I'm also eager to just get any feedback about what you guys thought about the overall thing.
I have a question, but
Yeah.
not just for you, but anybody here. Like,
Mhm.
is there interest for? Should I create like a channel for people who want to experiment with this?
Yeah, I mean, we could do that.
I'm definitely into it. I mean, this is Durgadas. This is exactly what I needed. I mean, it's perfect timing.
Cool. Yeah, I'm into that. I think I'd like to establish some kind of um, ground rules for that, and I'd like to do this, in a professional capacity too. So there's a little bit of, if we could pool together some, idea about what that would be, like maybe monthly, so that I could, so if there's a certain maybe amount of crypto that we could, pool together as participants, that would happen monthly, then I could be showing up and be invested in that, you know. So,
Yeah.
I hate to bring that into the conversation, but I am trying to. I put an awful lot of time, energy, and effort into this over a very long time. So, um, yeah, it would be good if that was, just respected.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you will be rewarded even for this first session. But
Oh,
yeah,
thanks. Yeah, I didn't
if we
expect
plan
that,
on
but
doing this like
yeah.
every month, then yeah, for sure.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, these are the thing that I'd like people to do is that maybe just, I'd like to get a cohort of people who would really commit to the process for a year, so that they can see how it works from the inside, because it's literally the only way you can grasp some of the deeper implications of some of this stuff and make the kinds of adaptations that um, some folks were asking about. So um, yeah, it's not easy, and it's not simple, but then once you get on the thing, I have to say it's the one of the best things I ever did in my whole life. So yeah, and by the way, I've got a couple of people who are living this already, and she would have been here herself to sort of talk about it and speak to uh, her experience of it. She's incredibly positive about the entire thing, and it's one of the key takeaways from the autism course was that. But I think it works well for just about anybody. So yeah, please do feel free to ask questions. Anybody, I'm here for another 15 minutes or so, and I'm super interested to make you guys as successful as I can at this.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's very needed in this space where people just
Just
burned
burnout.
out.
Yeah, this is a way to kind of get out of that. That's kind of a Faustian bargain, right? And I was just trying to reveal what part of your own mind and what cultural context has sort of made you agree to that Faustian bargain. You don't. It's optional. You don't have to do that. Why don't you reclaim agency and autonomy over your time, and align yourself more with the inner, way that your body and your mind and your neuroadaptivity already functions. And once you start seeing the way these cycles work, then you're going to see them everywhere. And that's I can't unsee any of this stuff anymore, just because I lived inside of it for so long, and I can watch a new guy show up at my job, and in 4 days he feels a little more comfortable. In a week he feels better. In 3 weeks he starts to be effective. In 6 weeks he's like, okay, now I've got this. And 3 months from now, and you know what I mean. You could just see how it works. And if you talk to them, their own experience about it shifts according to these same cycles too. So yeah, it's really a beautiful thing. I've seen it over and over and over again over a period of 25 years.
It kind of like I would totally be willing to pay like a seed a month for that. I mean, I think
Cool.
if we got a group of people, that also kind of gives a good reason for seeds. So I mean, that'd probably be a pretty healthy pile. And I would totally be open to tracking myself through that and kind of getting some visibility. So yeah, 100%.
Well, one of the things I want to do is produce an app where you can be like, okay, here's my goal, or I have 2 goals for this year, and then count back the Sundays, do you want to, maybe your goal is on a Saturday, so then you could, it would already do the flipping of the Wednesdays and Thursdays for you, and all that. I mean, there's all this sort of stuff that you could do just um, computationally that would be of tremendous help to folks in this space. So, Bagholder, you were going to ask a question?
Well, I think actually you kind of just touched on it. I was wondering, this is what you do, right? So obviously this is how you satisfy your economic needs, and that obviously has to be respected. And I wondered if, just because it's one-on-one stuff, right? So it's by necessity, it's
Right.
not particularly cheap. But it's.
Yeah, but if it was a group, it'd be cheaper for the participants and more
Of
profitable
course.
for me, right? So
Yeah, and so just in that same sort of vein, I wondered if you had considered devoting some time to producing materials that maybe people could use to kind of get started, and maybe explore some of the value of this sort of system before they dove into that level. And if you were, then would you be looking for any sort of funding for that? Like, I feel like that would be something that would be a really digestible way, like, maybe not necessarily Kickstarter, but along those kind of lines, to produce some sort of, I don't know, like DIY kind of kit. I don't, know enough about the system to know if that's something that would work, but yeah.
yeah, I mean, like I say, the if you go back to the the thing that's important about this is the meta portion of it, right? So if you go back to the if you go back to this, right, the minimum mission increment, the minimum visible progress is basically on a weekly basis, right? And then to be able to build toward a goal, it's going to take a 6-week investment, right? So I guess my previous work with people were just highly motivated athletes or even executives who really needed some way to feel that they were making progress, because many times in this thing we're just working. We don't have any way of contextualizing the work that we're doing into some larger sense. It creates a kind of a meaning structure as well. This is part of the meta cycle. What this all is, all this meta cycle stuff, is basically the structure of how one builds meaning into one's life, really. And it's an incredibly, like, when I work with athletes, they're like, I probably could have been as fit as working with any other coach or whatever, or if I'm talking to an executive, probably could have gotten executive things, but I wouldn't have felt the same about it. I wouldn't have had as much meaning. I wouldn't understand exactly how my intention becomes reality. And that additional thing is the reason why I think this has sort of value over maybe some of the other, like Covey or things that other people have done in the past. So yeah, I mean, I have to say, the thing that these complicated graphics, I designed them. I spent weeks building them and everything. So in some way, I'm partway there. So yeah, maybe what we could do is do some kind of a raise where I would finish off the additional graphics that I feel are necessary to fully do this, and maybe write up a thing, and so maybe produce like a workbook, and then from that workbook I could be like, hey, it's so much for the workbook, and then you could kind of sort that out for yourself. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, not necessarily suggesting, just kind of curious about, wondering if that was kind of on the horizon, or
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, this is the very first time I've presented this sort of publicly. So I've shown it to a bunch of different people, and it's motivated people enough where they're like, I'm going to apply this to my whole life. And so I'm sort of in a bit of an alpha test mode on this. So this presentation really changes the thing from the alpha test mode into the beta test mode, and so so that's kind of where I am.
Really useful to like a broader
Yeah.
people than may be able to be reached through one-on-one. I mean, even if everyone that sorry about the lawnmower, even if everyone trained that went on to kind of teach more people, it probably be fairly slow uptake.
Yeah, and that's my basic approach to everything. For the autism course, we're creating a cohort of 6 next time around, and we're going to use this and other tools to move that forward. So yeah, I have very similar plans in that way, and so if we wanted to create a cohort of folks like in the crypto space and make adjustments that are specific to this like perpetual work thing that we all find ourselves in, that I think it's got a lot of applicability to a lot of different places, working parents and on and on. I mean, there's a lot of, I'd like to make sure that I'm testing it in different cohorts and making the adaptations and bringing the compassion toward, what people are struggling with to make this relevant to that as well. So yeah, so that's very much in line with kind of what I was thinking. So if we can get a cohort of, I would say, a minimum of 6 and some kind of thing, and then maybe we can, use that cohort to allow me to evolve the materials and produce almost like a DIY kit, like you're suggesting. But yeah, if I just kept doing this, I think the workbook thing would kind of evolve out of it, and then maybe the first sort of thing I would produce out of it would be kind of a DIY kit. Um, I just keep feeling like I need to validate that a little bit, and to have a cohort to because I've done this a lot with athletes, but done this a lot with people who are in the just speaking from my own experience and trying it out on people who are running companies and so on, but I just haven't applied it to these different cohorts. So and I've certainly not produced the kind of materials like I have now to summarize a lot of this work. So yeah, I'm open to a lot of that kind of thing. Thank you for the suggestion.
Awesome.
And can you say just a little bit more about the autism cohort that you're doing as well?
Sure. So so this woman who's in my Spiral Dynamics group, I started talking about how I was on the autism spectrum and the ways in which I've sort of dealt with that, and she said, "Well, I actually go to a college called Antioch University, and they'll basically allow me to decide who I want to learn from, and then you just become a teacher, and then they have some other person on staff with a master's or better degree who basically becomes the teacher of record, and I'm the actual teacher." And so we created I basically just showed up. I had no idea what I was going to teach, and the course kind of evolved out of my own awareness of what I had reflected on, because I'm applying this meta stuff to myself too. I'm not just the dude who's creating this. I'm living sort of embodiment of all this. I've reflected on how is it that I got to where I got to, and how is it that in my 52 years I managed to overcome the othering and overwhelm that I experienced in my life. And so I wanted to bring some of those tools that I had experienced in the developmental thinking and the nonviolent communication and all of this stuff is all stuff that people in the autism spectrum really need, right? There are very specific problems, but the interesting thing is that people on the autism spectrum actually share a lot of the same struggles as people who are working 3 jobs or working in the gig economy or have a real job plus they do all this crypto stuff. And you know what I'm saying? Like the amount of stuff that's on everybody's plate now just to make a living these days is so enormous. That's very much like coming out of the womb and not being able to filter your sensory experience. So I felt like we had an awful lot. I had an awful lot that I had learned and been able to transform that othering and overwhelm into, competence and compassion and being able to sort of co-create things with people. And that's not a common experience for people on the autism spectrum. So I thought, well, if I taught this one person, then she really got it. And she's just, like I said, this is her creation, this thing here, um, you know, and everything that I said was just like, yeah, this is super applicable to me. Then I thought, okay, well, maybe I can take portions of that and help different people I also work with people with who grew up with narcissistic abuse like myself, and so some of the stuff that I bring to the autism spectrum discussion comes from my work on my own inner trauma, and my work with athletes, and my work with people with really deep-seated parental trauma things. The fact that I work in a native band was literally generational, genocidal level abuse exists there. My wife, even though she's an Olympic medalist, suffers constantly from sexism and literally got run out of her job on the basis of racism by old white guys. So, like, I've just developed all this stuff to try to have a unified theory of bias that can apply to women and people of color and people on the spectrum, and so I'm trying to take all this stuff that I've devised in my head and strategies that I've used for myself and sort of do what I can to assist people in all these different walks of life. And one of those is people on the spectrum, like myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I myself have kind of been dealing with sensory issues with my daughter, and
Yeah.
kind of noticing a lot of like the spectrum issues even with myself.
Yeah.
And like just like how disconnected and like awkward I felt in the real world,
Yeah.
and how
Yeah.
I've been able to adapt in the crypto world.
Yeah.
And so like I'm I'm super high functioning, you know. So
Yeah.
it's as a
Yeah.
software developer, but like my brain just doesn't work like most people's. I remember the
That's
code
right.
from 7 years ago, like line by line. It's a different experience when I can still tell you
That's
about the
right.
bug that you didn't fix like 10 years ago.
Yeah. And I have I have a syncretic, almost synesthetic map of what different people need when I'm working with them, when I'm coaching them. Um, and because of my yogic thing, I have um, I'm experiencing things in 3, 4, 5 dimensional space. So for me, it's easy to there's no way for me to fully explain it now, but in many ways, people on the spectrum, because we can't filter, if you can flip that around, what you can do is you can turn that into what I call usable bandwidth, right? So if I can't filter anything, how about I develop strategies with which that I can, instead of being just sort of crushed under the weight of that, what if I were to sort of almost qigong or like tai chi the energy of that into something that's usable to me? And this is kind of the approach that I've taken to all of it. We, like I say, in the second cohort of people, of which you're, I mean, it's literally you can just pay. It's college credit. You can get for this thing. You know what I mean? Like this is a master's level course. So you could just you just pay the money and get the actual credit for that, and we can all in next cohort come up with a way to shift your lives, and then hopefully from that we'll get a cohort of people who would then be willing to then spread that around, kind of like Bagholder was talking about around you know I'm thinking a little bit in terms of like the nonviolent communication model, where it was like Marshall Rosenberg, he wrote this book and he created all these things, and then he went around and gave lectures everywhere, and then there's gradually kind of a movement underneath him to assist with the nonviolent communication. This is in many ways what I'd like to do with some of these other things that I'm talking about, not just this, but with decolonization and with autism, and solving sort of some of these root problems that turn our societies into such giant divided messes, and so there's an underlying problem with that, and if you can accurately diagnose the problem, you can also accurately fix the problem through education, and through creating small motivated groups of people who can see themselves in others, and extend the thing which they've learned out into the world, and create because the real commons is in the minds and the hearts of other people, right? And we talk about the common stack and all this stuff, and we talk about money and crypto and trying to decentralize things in life, but the whole point is if you don't connect all of that with the underlying psychology and ethics and what about all the trauma of colonization, all that, you have to handle all those things internally with yourself. And then once you handle that, then the world changes around you. You can see things more clearly. And then you now that you have compassion for yourself and you're treating yourself well, then you can then extend compassion to people, right? And if you're on the autism spectrum, I mean, look, I have just vast technical skills. I have so many different things that I've had special interests for over a 52-year period. Now I can just go back and leverage all of them and combine them all together into some usable thing for the good of humanity. And I was really inspired by the book Neurotribes, where inside of that book you could see there was a lot of people in human history really obviously autistic, and a lot of those people actually made huge advancements for society and for culture and for science and so many things. And I'm really interested in doing that for humanity in my own sort of humble way. So,
thank you.
So I think it's a good stopping point, unless somebody else says something pressing. Thank you guys so much. It was great.